Okay, so the first step on the Phlamin Pheasant, once you've actually taken the thread to the back of the hook, is to put on the tail. And for the tail we just use pheasant tail fibers and undyed pheasant tail fibers. Use about 5 of them. And once they're on, you need to ensure that a portion of them, I usually take 2 or 3 of the fibers, are kind of left behind. The rest will wrap forward to cover the remaining pheasant tail fibers as we move forward. We also need to tie in at the back our hollow tinsel. So hollow tinsel I initially got from Joann's, actually, from this company called Sulky. Now most fly tying shops have a version of this that is much wider and much easier to use, actually, so I would recommend getting those. But once those are tied in, then you're ready to move on to step 2. Okay, so once we have this ready, we're going to go ahead and tie these forward to approximately halfway up the entirety of the fly, maybe as much as 2/3 of the way up the fly. I personally like it about halfway up. Once you're there, you're going to build a little bit of a tapered top with the thread. Come back a little. So one of the major keys to this bug too is the application of some super glue as you move through. I really like, you can use some head cement too, but I find that super glue works quite a bit better in this application. The reason we do that, as you'll see here in just a minute, is that this wrap is susceptible to kind of being moved off of the fly. And so we'll ensure that the fly itself is covered in the hollow tinsel. Gives it that nice look, that nice appearance. As we go through, you'll also see some of that, some of the cement, in this case our super glue, kind of comes through the cracks, and as we go through the next step, that's going to be really, really important. So once you put on all the hollow tinsel over the back portion of the fly, you can, tie that portion off. Then you go ahead and you wrap forward with your pheasant tail fibers. And you really only need 1 to make this look appropriate. The reason I leave a few extras because they're really frail, and sometimes you break, and then you've basically lost a hook. So you bring this forward, you kind of segment the body out with the pheasant tail fiber. It's being anchored also with the super glue so that this becomes a really durable fly. And that's the back portion of the bug. So one of the first things you do before you move ahead on the fly is you take care of all kind of the excess pieces, all the excess fibers. So you can simply clip off the pheasant tail fiber from there and from the front, and now we're ready to move forward. First thing we'll tie in is what's called scud shellback from Orvis. It has some other names as well. You tie that in to ensure that you're basically going to create a shellback on the thorax portion, the upper portion of the fly. Right. So once you have this in place, tie the rest of it down there all the way up to the bead. Once this is in place, then we can start to use, dub forward on the fly, and I'll show you that in the next step. Okay, so for the dubbing, we use an ice dub. You can use a bunch of different ones. An olive brown works really well, or even a peacock ice dub. In fact, if you want to go completely natural with this, you can also use just peacock herl. Works just fine. Take this on, we get it onto the thread, and we wrap from the back portion of the body that we built, start to wrap forward all the way up to the bead, and then we simply put the shell back over the back of the fly and anchor that in. 1 or 2 wraps to get it secure. Then we'll move on to the wings and end up the fly. So for the wings, or kind of the front legs, I guess, on this fly, depending, it's an attractor pattern, so it could be either. We're simply just taking pheasant tail fibers. You can do this, people have their own opinions on how you tie these in. I typically do it once the fly is basically finished. You can do it for each side. Basically, you wrap it directly against the bead itself, and then you pull to the desired length. I like it to be almost, if you were to lay it back, it would reach the end of the fly or the end of the body before the tail. And so you'll do this on each side. The reason I do it afterwards is because it like kind of flares out the legs or the wings significantly. And so I'll put this in on the other fly, and then I'll show you kind of the last, or on the other side, and then we will show you kind of the last bit before we wrap it up and whip finish it. So effectively we're kind of done with the bug at this point, and we can now just whip finish. I like to add just a little bit of dubbing on the thread as I whip finish to kind of finish off the collar really nice. I think it adds a little something to the fly itself too. So you whip finish here. Effectively, there you go. There's the Phlamin Pheasant.